China by participating in the Malabar exercise. And India sees a new regional role for its navy. In other words, India is now has this policy, implementing this policy of looking east. You know, the South China Sea is east of India. So the policy is to look east. In other words, not just stay in the Indian Ocean, but to go inside the South China Sea. And why are they doing this? Because they have a stake in a joint exploration project that they have with Vietnam. India also needs energy, and they're looking at Vietnam as a source, but of course, China is trying to block India there. Naval exercise of China. China held their live fire drills in the South China Sea before the ruling of the Arbitral Tribunal. The message there is they're trying to intimidate and sending a very strong message, because they use not only warships but fighter jets, submarines, and held live fire war games in the South China Sea, but not close to the Philippines. It's there in the Paracels area because they apparently they also don't want to make this very provocative. But of course, I look at this as a bully continuing to be a bully, because their television station reported that they use missiles, torpedoes launched from ships, jets flew information, released flares, and submarines surfaced in the water. This is a very intimidating drill that they conducted using guided missile destroyers and one missile brigades. Now they're looking at the South China Sea as a plus point. Another message, and this was delivered by a former retired U.S. Admiral, the former commander of the Pacific Command, when he made a talk before members of the U.S. Congress. U.S. could go to war with China over Scarborough Shoal. This is a very strong message. The U.S. could go to war. From the article, a military confrontation could ensue between the U.S. and China if the latter starts reclamation activities in the disputed Scarborough Shoal off the coast of the Philippines. That is a statement of Admiral Dennis Hale. So if the Chinese push there, in other words, what is appearing now is that Scarborough Shoal could be the red line as far as the U.S. is concerned. And according to Dennis Blair, China would have no chance of winning in the event of a maritime clash, considering the setup of the U.S. and the Philippine military forces in the disputed waters. According to him, it's the kind of trouble that the U.S. and the Philippines are going to win, because the military situation is set up that way. Of course, that's very reassuring, going to win, but the question is, at what cost, for example? Because there's always a cost in winning. The inevitable war between the U.S. and China, you know, as a student of military history and conflicts, I fully agree. This is my own assessment already, that the tension in the South China Sea, in fact, the entire Indo-Pacific area, is rising, with strong statements matched by a convergence of powerful military assets in operation in the area. Number one, artificial islands of China that are going to be militarized soon. Number two, freedom of navigation operations of the U.S. Navy. Three, entry of India announcing its operational deployment of naval assets in the Pacific. Four, Japan's intention to conduct patrols in the South China Sea. Five, the recently concluded combined operations of 2 U.S. aircraft carriers. And number 6, very strong statements from Admiral Harris, the commander of the U.S. Pacific Command, to the consternation of China. So this is what I call the scenario that could lead to an inevitable war if things don't simmer down. Now here's the comparison of the military assets between U.S. and China. Submarines, they're almost equal. But of course, quality-wise, the U.S. is more advanced. Aircraft carriers, it's China has only one. They're constructing one right now. U.S. has 10, and they're constructing some very big super carriers coming soon. Their nuclear arsenal, there's no match. China's only about 250 deployed by the U.S., 1,797, but they have more warheads than that. They have about 8,000 warheads that they can deploy. Active military aircraft, 2,000 for China, 5,000 for U.S. And here, U.S. is ahead in terms of number, and in terms of quality. And total active military forces, 2 million, 1.4 million. And to me, this is not very relevant because you're talking of an army here that would not be participating in an air-sea battle in the South China Sea. So the more relevant would be these other features here. It shows you US and China military forces compared as of 2015. You're talking of a possible Navy showdown. And in terms of, but the China has an edge insofar as the so-called air denial anti-access weapons. These are the hypersonic missiles. They have the Dongfeng 21D, and this is the range of the Dongfeng 21 here. And because of that, the aircraft carriers of the US will find it very risky to penetrate this radius here. So they have to stay in this part of the Philippine Sea. But they have a more potent weapon, the Dongfeng 26, this one, which is a range of about 2,500 kilometers that can reach all the way to Guam. But of course, we're talking here of weapons that are not yet tested. In other words, you're talking of the design, but the actual operation may be something different because, and here, the expansion of China in the South China Sea because of their artificial islands. And this what could happen if they militarize an island here, a feature here, the artificial island. It can have a radius for their J-11 that will cover the entire Philippines, all of Borneo, most of Vietnam, even part of Indonesia. In other words, their J-11 can go out and come back and operate. That is the kind of threat that they have. So the China Sea now is considered a veritable powder keg. But you know, but it's not only the South China Sea. The situation is even hotter in the East China Sea. East China Sea is that part of the China Sea facing Japan. Because there we are seeing a lot of scramblings going on. And here's the latest, because every time there's a Chinese aircraft that would penetrate the airspace of Japan would have to scramble jets. And here's the record of scrambling there. 2009, only 38 is against China. But you can see that it's increasing. And last year, there were 571 scramblings of fighter jets of Japan. In fact, April to June, there were 199 scramblings. In other words, every day, there's a scrambling of the fighter jets of Japan in order to counteract the penetration of a Chinese aircraft in their territory. P-8, there's a P-8 surveillance plane of the US being intercepted by a J-11 Shenyang flanker. Tension is leveling up. Japan orders hundreds of missiles, helicopters, as China flexes muscles. And in fact, Japan now is going to order $40 billion worth of fighter planes. Imagine that, 40 billion. Their defense budget last year or this year is 42 billion. That's the whole defense budget. Now, they're going to order $40 billion worth only for fighter planes. And they're planning to order from the US Navy, the Osprey helicopters to be delivered to Japan in the next 4 years. More hundreds of anti-aircraft missiles. So they're all preparing 246 SM-2 Block standard missiles, Ospreys, etc., etc. What is the latest status of China-controlled islands and artificial islands? Here are the artificial islands occupied by China that they built. Woody Island, they have a runway that can be used by a J-11 fighter. Subi Reef, they have a 3,000-meter runway and they have an early warning air defense radar. Same in Fiery Cross Reef, they have a 3,000 runway. Quarteron Reef, they have an early warning and air defense anti-air guns. Lighthouse. Johnson South Reef, these are all very close to the Philippines. Early warning and air defense radar, anti-air guns. Mississippi Reef, inside our exclusive economic zone, they have an early warning and air defense radar already, and they have a runway. used rig outside our exclusive economic zone, but very close. They have anti-air guns and early warning air defense radar. Same in Gable Reef and Scarborough Shoal. Of course, some people are predicting that reclamation there is going to be imminent already. You know, I'm going to maximize my time so that Attorney Santos there will not be able to ask questions. Now, here's the creeping invasion strategy. The creeping invasion strategy of China. You know, always they start with their maritime militia, fishing fleet. They did it in Mississippi Reef. They did it in Scarborough Shoal. They started to do it in Malaysia. They started to do it in Indonesia. They had 200,000 fishing fleet that would be their advanced fleet. They're supposed to be civilian, but they have links with the military, trained by the military also. And backing up this fishing fleet is the huge Coast Guard fleet. And here's a comparison of the Coast Guard in the area. China has 205 large Coast Guard ships. Japan has 78, Vietnam has 55, Indonesia has 8, Malaysia has 2, the Philippines has 4. So China has a bigger Coast Guard fleet than the other countries combined. And of course, the combatants. Here are the combatant ships of China. 303 for China, 67 for Japan, 61 for Indonesia, 37 for Vietnam, 23 for Malaysia, and 14 for the Philippines. And here's EDCA, the location of EDCA. I think you're all familiar that EDCA, there are 5 designated bases under the EDCA, Expanded Defense Cooperation Agreement, and out of the 5, 4 are air bases. The air bases in Basa, the one in Palawan, in Mactan, and the old airport in Cagayan de Oro, Lungi Airport, and the one in Mactan, and an army base in the Port Magsaysay. You can see that the thrust of EDCA is air defense or air attack, looking at it that way. Now, former President FBR said that he is accepting to become the special envoy to China, the position of China. However, he said that he is willing to set aside the Hague ruling in the China talks. And you know, in my opinion, in my humble opinion, the Philippines should hold talks with China based on the ruling of the Arbitral Tribunal and not take it out. Unlike what the former president said, he said that if it's all right, if we take out the other judgment from the talks, I think it's not all right because we worked hard for that. It is an asset for the Philippines. It's an ace that we should maximize instead of setting it aside. Japan, US, Australia urged China to accept the South China Sea ruling. And I have a quick comment here. Does negotiation with China make sense for the Philippines? In my opinion, it's going to be very difficult because the first condition, I doubt very much whether they will change. The first condition of China is for the Philippines to accept that they have sovereignty over the South China Sea, including about 80% of the West Philippine Sea. And to me, that is unacceptable. We cannot even negotiate that. And it's a good thing that of late, how about China as a joint development partner? My question there, my opinion there is that it is fraught with danger and disadvantages to have a joint development partnership with China. What if there is a dispute in the joint venture? How would it be arbitrated with China's bully attitude? Supposing we want to end the joint venture, how do we kick them out when their warship is in the area? In the private sector, with joint venture with the private sector, arbitration is enforceable. And Shell or Chevron or any other oil company will go there, not supported by a warship. The statement of President Duterte, and to me I welcome this, and he said during SONA, with regard to the West Philippine Sea, otherwise known as the South China Sea, we strongly affirm and respect the outcome of the case before the Permanent Court of Arbitration as an important contribution to the ongoing efforts to pursue the peaceful resolution and management of our dispute. Secretary Kerry arrived yesterday and met with our Secretary of Foreign Affairs and with the president, and he wants to turn the page. In other words, he is in favor